Welcome back to my channel. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. It's great to have you here. When she first crossed paths with him, the world seemed to pause in a way she could never quite explain. There he stood, not particularly remarkable at first glance, just another face in a sea of busy lives and endless days. His presence, though, carried a quiet strength, a stillness that made her glance twice when she had every reason to keep walking. She would have told herself that it was chance, nothing more, just a fleeting moment destined to vanish like so many others. Yet the truth was that the instant their eyes met, something shifted in her heart, something small yet undeniable, as if life itself whispered, "Pay attention, this matters." She was used to being in control, guiding conversations, setting the tone, and deciding who belonged near her and who did not. People often said she carried herself with a certain firmness, a bossy charm that kept others both at a distance and close at the same time. It was easier that way, easier to hold her world together by being the one in command. But in that unexpected meeting, she found herself unsettled, because here was someone she could not simply order into place. His smile was disarming, his voice steady, and his calm eyes saw straight past her practiced armor. It made her uncomfortable, vulnerable even, in ways she had long promised herself she would never allow. He spoke first, not with grand words or rehearsed phrases, but with an honesty so simple it startled her. He asked her how her day had been, a question so ordinary yet spoken with such sincerity that she couldn't brush it off with a quick reply. Against her own will, she found herself lingering on the answer, sharing more than she usually allowed, and in that moment she noticed the way he listened. He listened not to reply, not to impress, but to understand. And that kind of listening was rare, almost foreign to her. As the conversation carried on, she found herself torn. A part of her wanted to keep her distance, to remind herself that she didn't need anyone intruding on the life she had built so carefully. Yet another part, the quieter, softer part of her soul, longed to lean closer to hear more, to allow this stranger's presence to linger just a little longer. She told herself it was nothing, that tomorrow she would forget him and carry on as before. But deep down she knew she was lying to herself. The air between them carried a strange sort of electricity, the kind that makes one aware of the tiniest details. The way his hand brushed the edge of the table, the warmth in his laugh, the way his words seemed to weave into her thoughts, as though they had always belonged there. She had been told stories about love, of course, stories filled with chance encounters and fateful meetings, but she never truly believed them until now. It was as if destiny had gently taken her by the hand and placed her exactly where she needed to be, at exactly the right moment. She found herself remembering small details long after he had gone, the timbre of his voice, the way his eyes held hers without flinching, the strange comfort in his presence. It was maddening, in fact, for a woman who prided herself on reason and control to admit that her heart had betrayed her so easily, but it had, and with that betrayal came a curious excitement, a spark she hadn't felt in far too long. For him, the moment was equally striking. He had not expected her either, had not planned to meet someone who carried herself with such unshakable poise. To him, she was not simply a woman passing through his day. She was a presence, strong and captivating, with a spark in her eyes that dared him to look deeper. He admired the firmness in her tone, the authority in her words, but what caught him most was the glimpse of something softer that lingered beneath it all, like a melody waiting to be heard if one only listened closely enough. Their meeting, so ordinary in its setting, became extraordinary in its effect. For once, the world did not demand explanations or plans. It simply asked them both to notice each other, to recognize that sometimes the most unexpected moments are the ones that rewrite the story entirely. And though she might deny it, though she might pretend it was nothing more than coincidence, she knew she would remember it always. It was, after all, the beginning of everything. There was something about the way she carried herself that could never be ignored. Her steps were quick, deliberate, and filled with purpose, as though the very ground was meant to move in time with her stride. She spoke with clarity, each word measured, each thought sharpened, and her tone left little room for misunderstanding. To those who did not know her, she could appear almost intimidating, a woman who seemed determined to bend the world to her will. People called her bossy, and perhaps she was. Yet within that boldness was a spark that drew him in, not out of fear or resistance, but out of pure admiration. He noticed the way her eyes never wavered, how she looked directly at people, steady and unflinching. It was not arrogance, but conviction, the kind that could silence a room without raising her voice. She had a confidence that seemed to wrap around her like a cloak, protecting her from doubt and shielding her from weakness, and though others might have judged her for it, he found himself enchanted by the strength she displayed. To him there was beauty in a spirit unafraid to lead, unafraid to command, unafraid to be exactly what she was meant to be. She never asked for permission to be herself. She never softened her edges just to fit into someone else's idea of gentleness. Instead, she stood firm, and he saw how rare that was. In a world that often demanded silence, she spoke. In a place where many would shrink, she stood tall. And yet, beneath the steel in her posture and the determination in her voice, he glimpsed something tender, something fragile, as if she wore her strength not only as armor, but also as a reminder to herself of what it took to survive. That duality, toughness on the outside, softness carefully hidden within, was what made her so captivating. He remembered the little things, too, the details most people would have overlooked. The way her lips curved when she spoke with certainty, the sharpness in her wit when she challenged an idea, the quick roll of her eyes when someone underestimated her, each one, a sign of her fiery nature, made him smile when no one else noticed. It was as though every act of her bossy charm revealed a piece of her heart, disguised behind the firmness she wore so naturally. He found himself not only respecting her strength, but craving the moments when she would let her guard slip, when the laughter would escape her lips before she could stop it, when her vulnerability peeked out from behind the bold facade. The world often misunderstood her. Many labeled her demanding, difficult, or unyielding, but he saw beyond the surface. What others called difficult, he recognized as passion. What they saw as demanding, he understood as her desire to shape the world into something better. And what they thought of as unyielding, he saw as loyalty to herself, to her values, to the people she cared for even when she did not say it aloud. It was not a mask she wore, but a reflection of a soul unwilling to bow to anything less than truth. The more he watched her, the more he realized that her confidence was not something to fear, but something to honor. It was not designed to keep people away, but to challenge them, to see if they were strong enough to stand beside her. And he wanted to stand beside her, not because she needed him, but because he needed her. Her presence stirred something inside him, a desire to rise to her level, to meet her fire with his own, to embrace the energy she carried and allow it to shape him into someone stronger, braver, fuller than he had ever been before. Perhaps what touched him most was how effortlessly she lived as herself. She never pretended, never played at weakness, never molded her spirit to suit the comfort of others. In her, he found truth, raw and untamed, a reminder that strength does not mean the absence of tenderness, but the courage to hold both at once. Her bossy charm, as people so carelessly called it, was nothing less than her gift, the fierce, undeniable essence of who she was. And he admired her not in spite of it, but because of it. She was in every way unforgettable. From the very beginning, their words seemed to clash like steel against steel, sharp and ringing, yet strangely harmonious in their discord. Whenever they spoke, it was never calm, never safe. Instead, it was filled with sparks, a fire that burned not out of anger, but out of a strange and undeniable attraction. He would challenge her, question her certainty, provoke her just enough to see that flash of fire in her eyes. And she, quick-witted and fearless, never let his words go unanswered. To an outsider, it might have appeared that they could not agree on a single thing. Yet beneath every argument, beneath every teasing remark, lay a current of energy neither could resist. There were moments when their debates grew so lively that those around them would watch in silence, unsure whether to step in or step back. But he never feared her sharp tongue, and she never backed down from his persistence. Their exchanges became almost a game, though neither would admit it aloud. He loved the way she leaned forward when she argued, her voice steady and strong, as though she were daring him to match her intensity. She loved the way his eyes lit up, not with frustration, but with delight whenever she countered his points with brilliance and confidence. What should have been exhausting was instead exhilarating, for neither wished to win as much as they wished to keep the dance alive. And so they danced, though not with music or graceful steps, but with words that carried more weight than either of them could admit. Every disagreement, every challenge, only brought them closer to a truth neither dared to name. He teased her for her stubbornness, she mocked him for his certainty, and together they built a rhythm that was as much about affection as it was about contradiction. The world might have thought them mismatched, but they knew better. Their differences did not divide them. They bound them tightly, fiercely, irresistibly. There was, however, a tenderness hidden in the storm. When the teasing reached its peak, when the arguments reached their sharpest point, there came a silence between them that spoke louder than words. In that silence, she could feel the warmth of his presence, the unspoken admiration in his gaze. In that stillness, he could sense the vulnerability she tried to mask with her fire. They never admitted it aloud, but each argument left them more entangled, more aware of how impossible it was to walk away from one another. He admired her spirit, though he disguised it in playful provocation. She admired his persistence, though she hid it behind mocking smiles. They both understood, in some quiet part of themselves, that the clashes were not meant to divide but to test, to push, to discover just how deeply they could affect each other. And each time they did, the sparks that flew between them grew brighter, hotter, more impossible to ignore. Friends would sometimes ask him why he endured her endless challenges. He would only smile, for how could he explain that her very resistance was the thing that drew him closer? Others would ask her why she gave him so much of her attention when he irritated her so often. She would only laugh, for how could she confess that his persistence thrilled her in ways silence never could? The truth was that they needed each other's fire, each other's wit, each other's strength, because only in that clashing of hearts did they feel fully alive. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when one of them would soften, when the teasing gave way to a sudden kindness or an unexpected compliment, and in those moments the truth revealed itself, unguarded and undeniable. The fire between them was not destruction, it was creation. It was the shaping of two souls who refused to settle for less than passion, who refused to live in silence when they could live in sparks. And so their arguments continued, as endless as the days, as natural as the rising sun. For in every word spoken, in every challenge given, in every spark that flew, they discovered again and again that their hearts, though clashing, belonged only to each other. For all her firmness, for all the authority in her step and the sharpness in her words, there was a part of her no one could see at first glance. She wore her bossy boots with such certainty that people assumed she was unshakable, that nothing could ever reach her or bend her spirit. Yet within her, quietly hidden beneath that proud exterior, there was a gentleness, a longing that she dared not reveal. It was not weakness, but a tender truth, one she carried carefully, as though the world might crush it if she let it slip into view. He was among the few who sensed it. Where others saw only a confident woman who demanded to be heard, he noticed the flicker in her eyes when the world grew too heavy, the way her voice sometimes softened at the edges, as though she wanted to say more but held it back. She had mastered the art of appearing invincible, but he realized that behind the invincibility was a heart that longed not for control, but for understanding. It was not power she sought, but connection. Someone who might see her not as the commanding figure she projected, but as the tender soul she truly was. There were times when she let it slip, though she tried so hard to prevent it. In moments of laughter, when her guard fell for just an instant, the softness of her spirit shone through, and he saw the warmth she carried within. It was in the way her smile lingered longer than she intended, or the way her hand brushed his as though by accident, but stayed just a second too long. Those moments told him what she would never admit, that the strength she wore so proudly was not the whole of her story, and that beneath it she yearned for the simple comfort of being known. The world often misunderstood her. They mistook her boldness for pride, her firmness for coldness, her authority for arrogance. They could not see that these things were her shield, not her essence. For every sharp word she spoke, there was a silence afterward filled with doubt. For every confident step she took, there was a quiet question in her heart. Would anyone love her not just for her strength, but for her softness too? She had built herself into someone who could not be ignored, but deep inside, she wished for someone who would not only notice her, but stay to listen when her voice trembled instead of rang with certainty. He began to understand that her bossiness was not a wall meant to keep people out, but a way to protect the most fragile part of herself. She feared that if she showed her vulnerability, it might be taken for granted, dismissed, or worse, broken. Yet the more time he spent with her, the clearer it became that this vulnerability was not something to be feared, but something to be cherished. It was what made her human, what made her real, what made her beautiful beyond the boldness she displayed. She longed for someone to see the whole of her, to look past the surface and into the quiet chambers of her heart. And he did. He noticed how her eyes softened when she thought no one was watching, how her voice quivered when she spoke of things that truly mattered to her, how her hands shook ever so slightly when she reached for something she deeply wanted. To him, those moments were not flaws but gifts, the truest expressions of who she was beneath the armor she wore. Her secret vulnerability was not a weakness but a strength of another kind, one she had yet to embrace. It was proof that her heart had not hardened, that even though life demanded she be firm, she still carried within her the tender hope of being understood, accepted, and loved for all that she was. And though she might not have admitted it, though she might have continued to hide it behind her bossy charm, he saw it, and in seeing it, he treasured it. For in the end, it was not her strength that bound him to her, but her hidden gentleness, the quiet truth that behind her bossy boots was a heart that simply longed to be known. It began simply, almost too simply to notice. A word spoken, repeated, corrected, and spoken again. At first, it was nothing more than practice, the careful building of sentences, the soft rhythm of phrases exchanged back and forth. Yet with every word, something unspoken stirred between them. What began as a lesson in English slowly became a lesson in each other, as though the language itself had been waiting for them to discover more than grammar and pronunciation. She corrected him firmly, her voice steady, her tone leaving no room for doubt. He would grin, amused by her precision, and tease her for being so strict, but he obeyed her corrections all the same, repeating the word, shaping it until it pleased her. And each time she nodded, each time her lips curved into the faintest smile of approval, he felt as though he had conquered something greater than language. For him, the reward was not the perfect sentence, but the sparkle in her eyes when he finally got it right. She told him stories, simple at first, meant only to guide his ear to the sound of the language, but the stories became something more. They were filled with emotions, laughter, moments of suspense, moments of tenderness, and through them, she revealed parts of herself she might never have shared otherwise. He listened closely, not just for the words, but for the cadence of her heart that beat within them. Each story taught him more than vocabulary. It taught him who she was, what she cared for, what made her laugh, and what softened her voice. The lessons were never perfect. He made mistakes, she grew impatient, and their clashes were as much a part of learning as the successes. Yet even the mistakes brought them closer. When he stumbled over a word, she would roll her eyes, mock his accent, and laugh until he joined her. When she grew frustrated at his stubbornness, he would deliberately repeat his errors just to make her smile. It was in those imperfect moments that their bond grew strongest, for they realized that understanding did not always come from correctness, but from the willingness to listen, to try, and to share the journey together. What surprised her most was how deeply he cared to listen, not just to the words but to her. When she explained, he leaned in, eager, attentive, and it left her feeling seen in ways she never expected. To her, the lessons had begun as a task, a duty, a matter of discipline. But to him, every lesson was a bridge, each word a step closer to her. And in time, she began to feel the same, that with each exchange, each conversation, they were building something larger than language, something far more delicate and far more lasting. He discovered that language is not only about speaking, but about feeling, that every phrase carried her emotions as much as her thoughts. She discovered that teaching him was not only about rules, but about connection, that every effort he made was not only for understanding the words, but for understanding her. Slowly, the lessons transformed into something neither of them could have anticipated. They became their way of loving, of reaching each other through sentences and silences alike. There were moments when the words failed them, when he could not express what he wanted, when she could not find the patience to explain. And yet, in those moments, they found another kind of communication, through laughter, through glances, through the warmth of presence that spoke more clearly than any language could. It was in those quiet spaces between words that they realized what they were truly learning. Not English, not rules, but the art of listening with the heart. Every word they exchanged, every story told, every lesson shared, carried them closer to something they had not planned for, but could no longer deny. They began with language, but what they found was love. In the beginning, it was never supposed to become what it did. She was certain of herself, certain of her role, certain that her bossy nature was the only way to move through life without faltering. He, amused by her confidence, never quite resisted the temptation to tease her, to challenge her, to push against her sharp edges just enough to see how far they could bend. What started as a series of clashes, of lessons turned playful arguments, slowly unraveled into something softer, warmer, something neither of them could have predicted. There was laughter first, the kind that slips in unnoticed, born from mistakes in words, from stubborn corrections, from his deliberate mischief and her exaggerated sighs of exasperation. It filled the spaces between their sentences, turning what should have been stern lessons into moments of joy. She would laugh despite herself, caught off guard by his charm, and he would laugh simply because he loved to see her walls break, even for a second. They learned early on that laughter was its own kind of language, one that spoke across all barriers and revealed the heart in ways words never could. And then there was listening. Not the kind of listening that comes from obedience or from duty, but the listening that comes from care, from the desire to truly understand. He listened not only to the words she spoke, but to the emotions beneath them, the flicker of vulnerability she could not quite hide, the softness that contradicted her stern tone. She, in turn, listened to his silences, to the pauses where his feelings lingered unspoken, to the unpolished words that carried more sincerity than any perfect sentence could. Slowly, they realized that listening with the heart was far more powerful than any textbook lesson could teach. What began as a story of control and correction turned into a story of discovery, of themselves, of each other, of the spaces where their differences melted into a shared rhythm. He admired her strength, but he loved her tenderness even more. She resisted his persistence, but she cherished his laughter when he disarmed her most carefully built defenses. Each day, with each word, each glance, each smile, they stitched together something delicate and unshakable. There were struggles, of course. Times when their tempers rose too high, when her firmness met his stubbornness, and the sparks burned hotter than either intended. But even then, in those heated moments, there was always a thread pulling them back, a reminder that the fire between them was not destruction but passion. Each quarrel ended not in distance but in closeness, for their hearts, no matter how fiercely they clashed, always found their way back to one another. In time, she grew softer in his presence, not weaker, but free, able to let go of the armor she once thought she needed to survive. And he grew stronger with her, not because she demanded it, but because she believed he could be more than he was. They changed each other, not through force, but through love's quiet insistence. What had started as a battle of wills became instead a union of souls, where laughter replaced tension and listening replaced pride. It was a sweet ending, but also a beginning, the end of her loneliness disguised as authority, the end of his searching disguised as stubbornness. And it was the beginning of a journey neither had planned, one filled with love discovered not in grand gestures, but in the ordinary beauty of shared words, shared silences, and shared hearts. What started as a bossy story became a love story, and one that would last. And that's how a bossy beginning turned into love, laughter, and lessons from the heart. Every word, every clash, every smile carried them closer than they ever imagined. Sometimes the sweetest stories are found in the most unexpected meetings. If you enjoyed this journey, show some love with a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart.